On today's show, part 2 with myself and Jackson Frank talking all things Hawks, the Eastern Conference, and more is on the way.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1547 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Thursday, and this is actually part 2 of 2 with myself and Jackson Frank, good friend of the podcast. So if you missed part 1, that is probably the smart place to start your listening experience. It should be available in your podcast feed of choice right now, talking all things Hawks, the young guys in the Hawks, Quin Snyder, where they stand in the pecking order of the Eastern Conference, etc. And that's going to be more on on those topics right now on the podcast with Jackson as well. Please subscribe to the show. Make sure first to listen each and every day. Again, part 1 should be available right now. And without any more delay, part 2 is coming to you right now. I have one more Hawks question, and then we'll get to some East stuff quickly. And of course, we're going longer than I thought we were going to go, so my apologies. So all that said about the Hawks, and I know it's September 6th we're recording this. I'm not trying to pin you down to something here, but like, what do you make of this season before we'll get to the rest of the East? But like, stacking the Hawks up, they didn't make the changes like we said. Snyder, hopefully they're healthy. Like right now, they're this is not actually the first time in a while they haven't had any like summer injury stuff. Like everybody that I'm aware of is healthy at this very moment for the Hawks, which is nice. So what do you think of them? And also beyond like where they stack up, how do they kind of like, what swings this team? Like from a play-in team, is it just Snyder? Like what do you think of like sort of the X factors as well when it comes to the Hawks?
Yeah. So because I went on the Chase Down pod, the Cavs one with Justin and Carter a couple weeks ago, and they were asking me about the Cavs perspective and kind of where I see them stand in the East right now. I think kind of the class is still Boston, Milwaukee. Put them whatever you order on. Nitpick however you feel about those two teams. Obviously, they're not perfect teams by any means, but that's still kind of where I think the top two are. And then I think there's kind of a pretty fluid middle class that depends a lot on kind of just who takes the leap, who regresses. Obviously, the Sixers are in flux with the Harden situation. I like the Cavs, but I can't put them in the top tier just based on kind of how much they struggled last year. And I think the Hawks are right there in that kind of that second tier discussion. The Knicks are there as well, of course. But I do think the Hawks are going to be one of those teams. If the playing field is level, which it never is, of course, once the season starts, that I would pick to miss the plan in a positive sense, right? Like to get in that top 6. And I think the X factors, like to me, it's that consistency, right? Can they put enough point of attack and defensive options out there? That was their big issue against Boston, right? The offense looked pretty good. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but like they gave Boston a lot of issues offensively, but they couldn't stop anyone. Like Sadiq was pretty useful on offense, but Boston targeted him on and off the ball and to a lot of success. Okongwu had some issues there. Trey, Trey was a huge reason that Derek White had a big first couple of games there. DeJounte for the games, the 5 games he played, I thought was up and down. Made some good plays as an off-ball player, but at the same time, every time he goes for a steal, there's 3 times where he's getting backdoor cut. DeAndre Hunter looked like a shell of the really impressive point of attack guy we saw a couple of years ago, unfortunately. So to me, it's just kind of the consistency. Like that's the X factor for me is can they find guys who can defend, who can also amplify Trey offensively, because I think that was a big issue last year. Like I think, Beeble Index does some really cool stuff with like spacing ratings, and I think the Hawks in the lineups Trey Young played in were kind of in the bottom percentile last year for the most part. So that to me is the big thing, and I think the defensive growth or lack thereof is going to come from what sort of offensive player can Jalen be in the half court? Where can AJ take steps? You saw some good passing from him last year, but you also saw him force some stuff. And I think he's a really good complementary scorer. I like the upside he shows as a secondary creator, but it's just kind of the reality of trying to merge two. I don't want to say 2 timelines, because clearly they're trying to win now, but when you have a guy like Trey and DeJounte who are win now players whose stealing depends on the growth of guys like Jalen and AJ, especially because I think Okongwu, even if he's going to have growing pains, is already a pretty well established player, like we talked about earlier, much more so than Jalen and AJ, which makes sense. He was drafted 3 years before AJ, or 2 years before AJ, 1 year before Jalen, year and a half, and 2.5 years, obviously a little more time. So that's kind of where I see things. I guess not a year and a half over AJ, half a year over Jalen because of that weird 2020 draft. But
the never-ending cycle of 2020 draft. That was
that's where it stands to me. Is it's just I would put it on 4 guys. I would have it Jalen and AJ taking steps, and what sort of players are DeAndre and Bogey on both sides of the ball, right? So, which is a lot of pressure on those 4, but I think they would understand that, and they and also to a lesser extent, can DeJounte continue making strides as an off-ball player? Right? Like he's not a great shooter as a spot-up guy, but clearly was putting in the effort to become more comfortable in the depth catch and shoot guy alongside Trey. So that's kind of where I see things, and maybe DeJounte does, take a big step forward in that regard, right? It is a substantial change to go from a player who's the league created on a play-in team to someone who's trying to be a secondary option on a team that has aspirations higher than the plan. I know they didn't achieve those last year. Well, they did, but compared to San Antonio, you're losing the plan. So I'm rambling a bit now, but that's kind of I'm open to the idea of DeJounte being a more adept secondary player, even if I'm not the biggest fan of his skill set and fit alongside Trey. But I certainly see ways for that path and that partnership to be more complementary and potent.
Yeah, I purposely didn't make you do the whole Trey DeJounte thing for 10 minutes because I feel like I do it every time I go on a show that's not about the Hawks. They ask me about that, like the first thing or second thing. So I get all that. I mentioned, it's intriguing though that you brought up the guys you brought up because a lot of focus locally, as you might imagine, on AJ and Jalen. That's a very natural thing. They're young guys. They're very talented, and I've said those are both steals in the draft, in my opinion, as far as like talent versus draft slot. And those were great picks. I loved both of them. But yeah, I'm glad you brought up Bogey and Hunter as sort of the last Hawks thing. Bogey, I mean, self-explanatory. Like when he's good, they've been good, and he's a huge factor of their offense. Hunter is interesting in that you mentioned his point of attack defense declining last year. I totally agree with you. To be charitable to him, and I'm not always charitable to him on this podcast, I got to admit that. He's had some knee issues, and that might have been part of the reason why he's not been quite as let's say electric as a slider and in open floor, all that stuff. Maybe that comes back. He seems to be healthy this offseason. That'd be very helpful. But if I had to pick one guy other than, obviously Trey has to be good. We kind of understand that. One, like for this year only, it might be Hunter as like the guy who swings how good they are. And that's a little scary for Hawks fans because especially if you listen to this podcast, because look, Hunter's pedigree and the way he's talked about even outside of Atlanta versus his actual production is a pretty big gap. Like, I mean, I'm sure you notice this stuff whenever the Hawks are in a rare national TV setting. People talk about Hunter like he's a guy he's never been, basically, and it's because he's a top 5 pick. And I get all that. And when he looks good, he looks good. He had the big the one game in the Miami series 2 years ago that still gets brought up on every ESPN broadcast. All that said, I think it's an important year for him, both for the team and like they need him to be good. And if he's not good, they're going to have to move on at some point. I know they paid him, but like it's a number that's not insane. They could move him if they wanted to. And also with going back to AJ and Jalen and also Sadiq, who I think people haven't quite noticed this. Like every time I project Sadiq to be a starting power forward, I get some pushback about Jalen. And I'm like, they were playing Sadiq 35 minutes a game in the play. Like Quin, there was a very big gap on the trust level there. I'm not saying that can't change, but it seemed like immediately Sadiq was a guy that Quin and the staff quite a bit liked, and he's much more of a play. He's just a lot easier to plug and play. Like his defense is not good, and I will die on that hill. It was very bad last year when he arrived, but I think he'll be better on that end of the floor, and his shooting's really valuable. So anyway, that's speaking of your rambling. I'm now rambling, but I love that you brought up Hunter because I think people that don't cover the team every day kind of just like put Hunter in the 3-and-D like box and ignore him. And it's like, no, he actually hasn't been as good at those things as he's kind of built to be still after 4 years.
He has taken Josh Richardson's mantle as the guy that everyone just assumes is a perfect 3-and-D wing alongside high usage stars. And then you watch him for a few games, you're like, yeah, this guy maybe dribbles into some contested mid-range jumpers more than like, oh, and he gets beat around screens at the point of attack more than I'm like, maybe he's not as good at those things as I prefer. And they're both solid players, but they strike me as the Josh Richardson less so at this point of his career. But 4 years ago,
right?
He was kind of he was the darling of the 3-and-D archetype.
He also might play some 4. I mean, that's the thing. They might be more aggressive there. And like, I will always point out that he's been a pretty bad rebounder, which is a limitation if you want to play him at the 4. But, you see him on a court. he looks great. I mean, he's 6'8" and 220, and he looks like he can play the forward in his sleep. But it's been the rebounding there. But without Collins, take a lot of those minutes. Some of them probably going to go to Hunter. It might go a little bit smaller if AJ plays more. There's all that stuff. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Get ready for the NFL season right now with incredible offers from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If by the way, if you're a new customer, bet $5, you get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed with FanDuel. Plus, every customer who bets $5 can also get $100 off Sunday ticket from NFL, YouTube, and YouTube TV. Beyond the awesome perks of signing up right now, FanDuel has point spreads and over-unders, money lines, player props, futures, and much more. The app at FanDuel is also very safe and secure. They cover the whole range of sports you might be interested in at this point. That includes, of course, the NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, WNBA, college basketball, golf, tennis, soccer, auto racing, and much more. And now is the best possible time to join FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Kick off the NFL season with us, and an offer that you do not want to miss right now. That is FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Before we get out of here, though, I have to ask you, because I know the team you covered the most in the NBA is still the Sixers. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Fair to say. There's two teams, obviously, who are in this like very clear uncertainty. In the East, it's Miami and Philly in some respects, because Miami's got the Lillard thing, Philly's got the Harden. I don't even know what to talk about with the Harden thing. I'm not going to talk about that unless you want to, but like they're in their own kind of weird tier, and I feel like I actually was a guest on someone's podcast talking about the East a couple of days ago, and we didn't even talk about Miami and Philly because it's like, what are you supposed to say? Like it's like, okay, Miami, if they get Dame, is this, and if they don't get Dame, they're this. Philly, if Harden is, I don't even know if Harden even coming back is impossible. Anyway, what do you make of all that? Like, are you on Harden watch as the person who covers the Sixers? Like, or is it just like everybody's kind of waiting until camp and then we'll see?
Yeah, I don't really like. I've kind of tuned myself out of it. Like, it's
it's fair.
As someone who's now done the trade saga two times in 3 years with the Sixers. Obviously first Simmons, now Harden. Like, I just like, if something happens and I got a pod about it or I got to write about it, I'll do it. But I'm not even like, there was the Shelburne article today, and then there was him responding to it. I'm not posting Instagram stories on Twitter. I'm not writing about those. Like, I can't really analyze the team beyond the fact that it does seem as though Harden isn't going to be there. And for all of his playoff inconsistencies the last couple of years, it is going to make them a lot worse.
Yep.
Joel is a great player, but Harden is also someone who helped make Joel the leading scorer back-to-back years. I know Joel deserves the most credit for that, but kind of their pick and roll chemistry was huge for that. And so that's going to hurt them a lot. I don't know what they're going to get back, but I know it's not going to be someone who's even like a lead playmaker of any degree. So I would say I'm pretty low on the Sixers entering the year, just because I am assuming that Harden's not coming back. He has shown no indication of having interest in that. And they also lost George Niang. They lost Shake Milton. They lost Jalen McDaniels. Obviously, they replaced Shake with a guy like Patrick Beverley. They're hoping maybe Danny Green, a full year removed from his ACL injury, could give them something. But also, they just signed him to a non-guaranteed deal, and he is old. And so the wing depth is basically like, can Patrick Beverley, D'Anthony Melton play up in size, and can Daniel House Jr. do some stuff? Does Danny Green have anything left as a viable rotation player? So I worry about that. The spacing is going to be worse, with PJ and Tobias Harris kind of being, the fours this year, but much less of quick trigger players than George Niang. If they're, better players, they don't offer the kind of the same level of complementary offense, alongside a Maxey and an Embiid. So, I'm pretty down on them. The Heat, I don't feel great about, but I do think they're such a weird team. Obviously, we've talked about it with behind closed doors and whatnot. But they were the best shooting team 2 years ago when they were a really good regular season and playoff team, and then last year they were like the worst, shooting team, and then they were very good again by the time they made the playoffs. So if they're, now they lost Bruce and Vincent, two guys who were pretty important in that 2021-22 season, but can Josh Richardson, be a guy who's a high volume 3-point? He's been pretty good from through the last couple of years. Can Duncan Robinson, kind of replace Strus to an extent? If those questions are answered, then I think they'll be pretty good again. Because for all the talk about like playoff Jimmy was really, really good in the regular season last year too, and Bam was really good, of course, as well. Made the All-Star game. So we know that Spo is a really good coach. Maybe Jovic takes a step forward. So I think they'll be pretty good. Like if the shooting's there, And, I hate to kind of just chalk things up to that, but their offense is so, built around the DHOs and the spacing around Jimmy and Bam. So, it's tough to kind of pin that team down. But I would say, like, I'm relatively speaking, I'm more optimistic about the Heat than I am the Sixers. But I would have them in the same tier and that would be a tier with the Cavs and the Hawks. If you want to put,
Knicks.
Little sub tiers, Knicks, of course, too.
Yeah.
Maybe the Pacers find the way in there, maybe the Magic as well.
I was actually going to ask you that because, like, I promise I'll let you go, but I thought there's like a split on, like, if people include the Hawks in the upper tier or the lower tier, like especially if you make bigger tiers, like the Hawks are kind of the team that's in the limbo, even by the win totals. I know, I'm not sure how much you're cued into that world, but like, it's like the Knicks are 6 as the consensus team, and then it's the Hawks are kind of the consensus 7 right now. And then there's like another half tier, and then there's like that whole group of Indiana, Orlando, and then if you want to include Chicago or Toronto or Brooklyn, like it's like, and then those are the next 5. It's like this there's the top 2 that you laid out. That I think you said, I'm pretty sure you did, Boston and Milwaukee in some order. Then you have the unknown of Miami and Philly. Cleveland's kind of in that range. And then you got, where do you put New York? Where do you put Atlanta? And then, like, who do you like in that bottom tier? It's interesting to me, like the way it's already being framed here in early September.
Yeah, I think it's like I said, I have that top 2 of Boston, Milwaukee. I prefer it in that order, but I'm not tied to that.
Sure.
And then so I probably have Cleveland next, and then New York. If you want to swap those, basically kind of the playoffs, that's totally reasonable. And then I'd have probably Philly, then Atlanta, Miami, but that's a tier for me. And then
and it all depends on what happens with this team. I mean, you really can't reasonably tier. I mean, even though I'm kind of asking you to, you can't reasonably tier Philly and Miami right now, because like they're either, especially Philly, like they're not going to look like this. I don't think. I mean, Miami, you might be able to just talk about, like, okay, here's the Dame version or the non-Dame version. Philly is just like has to be kind of a shrug.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because it could happen that somehow Dame becomes open to another team, and but what it seems we know that Harden is not open to Philly, so that kind of
not.
The roster is going to look different. So yeah, then I'd have like that half. I'd probably have Chicago, Orlando, and Indiana all in the same tier. I'm not on Brooklyn this year. Maybe if the defense looks as good as it could be, but they were pretty bad defensively post-trade, despite having Mikal Bridges and Nick Claxton, 2 guys who I think are all defensive caliber players. But the offense was pretty ugly. They were good against. It was funny. They kind of felt like their best games always came against the Sixers defensively. Like that weird game they played them in the regular season, and then they were pretty good defensively in the despite the sweep. It was just the offense that fell off. I'm not a fan of them. Probably having them that Detroit tier. Charlotte's a weird one too. Full year of LaMelo, PJ Washington's back, Miles Bridges, is back as well. Like that team's probably still okay, despite maybe them being quite the dysfunctional organization, to put it kindly, but they're probably not going to be terrible like they were last year. Washington is weird too, because like, even though Washington won't be good, like they're not like in that weird tanking tier where they have a bunch of like guys, maybe this guy's an NBA player. They just have a lot of like guys who are NBA players, but nobody's a high level one.
Correct.
Which is generally a recipe for like being in a lot of games, but like not winning many of them.
All the shots imaginable for Jordan Poole and Kyle Kuzma, just trading off.
Yeah, and poor Corey Kispert sits in the corner and he's shooting 40%.
They have no one to pass him the ball. I'm kind of with you across the board, and like I do think that it's a pretty decent chance that like one of Indiana or Orlando or something like kind of has a little mini breakout this year. That's just kind of the way. There's always a team that does that. I don't know which one it's going to be. I mean, people seem to be. I think because of Halliburton playing in FIBA, people are kind of digging out on Indiana again. But Orlando's got young guys, and Paolo's playing too, and Franz looks good, and all that stuff. So, I think that I can take away from what you said that you're fairly high in Atlanta based on where you put them in that pecking order.
I wouldn't rank them like firmly among my top 4 right now. Like,
sure.
But they're in a tier that has the top 4 teams, and I wouldn't be surprised if they end up with a 3rd or 4th seed, depending on how things shake out with health and the Philly and Miami situations as we've kind of hammered home. But yeah, I think they should be pretty good. I think obviously like Trey is such a strange one because his shooting is kind of oscillated from year to year so much, and that is a pretty important part of his scoring efficiency. The passing's always going to be there. But you just compare the last couple of years in terms of kind of his true shooting. It's a big difference in kind of the scoring efficiency there.
Well, I wonder, just to be speaking your mind, I wonder how much how many more threes he takes versus mid-rangers this year with the new coaching staff and that emphasis. And, he's always been really good from floater range, but like he's not DeJounte level on taking frequency from mid-range, but he's been taking a lot, and McMillan didn't mind that. And I don't think Quinn likes it as much, but also Trey has free reign. I mean, that's the thing about Trey and especially DeJounte, like they're not going to stop taking mid-rangers. Like I know that's like a popular idea locally, like, oh, Quinn loves threes. I'm like, yeah, he does. They're going to take, I'm very confident they're going to take more threes, but they're not going to stop taking mid-rangers. It's not going to suddenly be Morey ball with these two guards. Like it's not going to happen. I don't think. Yeah.
Trey's a funny one because I remember 2 years ago, he kind of embraced the mid-range more as a counter, and then it feels like maybe he's
stayed
shifted there. Especially last year. I don't know. I don't have like the frequency in front of me, but especially last year with the 3 ball being much colder than it was the year prior.
He took a lot less. Yeah. I mean, it was, and again, he was allowed, I shouldn't say allowed. Trey has autonomy in a lot of ways, but like he was not pushed beyond the 3-point line in a way that I think Quinn will be nudging him consistently. And DeJounte too. And to his credit, DeJounte, when Quinn took over, took more threes. Like it wasn't. Yeah. He didn't stop taking mid rangers again. He's gonna never stop doing that. But he'll be. I think both of them are gonna edge out further and further, along with Hunter. Hopefully, I think that's messaging to him. I mean, Bogey and Bay don't have to be told that, I don't think. But the 3 guys who took all the mid rangers last year, they should be at least pushing it out a little bit further.
So. And who knows? I mean, DeJounte's right in his prime. Maybe he goes from a guy who's like comes from mid range and pretty solid to a guy who's suddenly elite, right? Like maybe he goes from that 45, 46 to 49, 50% for a year or two. And then the offense, it's much more palatable, right? When you shoot, you make half of your mid-range jumpers versus, 5 out of 11.
Trey did it 2 years ago. Trey shot 52% from long mid-range. And that was a big part of why he had the season he had 2 years ago. So anyway, we can stop rambling now. I kept you way too long. Jackson, thank you for all the time. This is going to be a long list, I feel like. Where can folks find all of your work as you do lots of things?
Yeah, I'm doing stuff with SB Nation, Dime UPROXX, The Analyst, and then also Liberty Ball, which is under the SB Nation umbrella, but I'm also, I'm doing stuff with SB Nation's NBA site as a whole. So it's been kind of a down couple of weeks just because we are in a weird lull with the NBA, but doing a little bit of FIBA coverage, a little bit of Sixers, a little bit of NBA, but I can't promise anything super riveting between now and
it's going to be coming soon. I promise you. I mean, it's good. We're going to get, I was looking at the calendar today. We're like 3.5 weeks from media day, 4 weeks from media, whatever it is. It's not far away. So
we'll be training camp. We'll knee deep in training camp in a month from now. That'll be
you'll be producing all kinds of content. But people should be checking your stuff out. I will recommend that at the highest level. You talked about our behind the paywall conversations that we have in the UPROXX Slack channel on a regular basis. But I do sincerely thank you for doing this. I will do it again. Another point. I should ask you to come on more often. But you got enough going on in the world.
Yeah, no worries. Appreciate it. Always happy to come on and talk Hawks and NBA. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate it. As for everybody else, please subscribe to the podcast, and we'll see you all next time.